Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnis Luks here at the Crossroads, and I'd like to welcome my two guests from Canada. Welcome, Robert Klinck.
Hi, Arnie. Good to be with you again. I hope I won't have my power interrupted by this violent thunderstorm that's going on outside. You
Okay,
might be hearing it.
no, we can't actually hear it, Robert, but I appreciate what's going on. Our weather's a bit kind. Later on this week, we're getting up to above 20 degrees. So we're going to shoulder up to your
Beautiful.
daytime temperature that some of you are experiencing. Welcome, Wallace Klinck. No worries. Thank you for that, Wally, and welcome aboard for today. Now, I'm going to cut across to the front page of the Australian and just touch on some items, some articles that are there. It's interesting that New South Wales is not under as severe a lockdown as Victoria, but it's still the quarantine numbers, new cases, and that sort of thing is on the news. Interesting that Sweden does not have lockdown at all. Sweden has advisory guidance, and that's all it does. And their industry, their economy is continuing to march on. So this, to me, is very profound that we're seeing two different tactics. And in Australia, we have no discussion at the moment. And so there's these other articles that are there, and there's some big articles here in regard to communist China and its inordinate influence on Australian politics, through industry, through our universities, and that type of stuff. So to me, it's quite profound. It's quite important to sort of place these things into context, because the Victorian Premier is an openly confessing, card-carrying communist, Bolshevik. Every cartoon I see, he's in the green communist garb with the green cap and the red star. And so everyone agrees that this is what he is. He's a totalitarian. And he's forcing the lockdown whether they need it or not. And to me, it's time for us to start thinking about what are our options. And I believe we do have options. We've got to start thinking a little bit smarter. 1975, the Governor-General, Sir John Kerr, removed the commission of Gough Whitlam and instilled that commission to Malcolm Fraser on the basis they hold an immediate election. So a minority government was commissioned and called for an immediate election, and they did, and the people decided the outcome, 1975. Now, I understand in the 30s, under Labor Premier New South Wales, Labor Premier J.T. Lang, I think it was, Jack Lang was doing some things, as I understand it, in an attempt to protect the finances of the state, to protect superannuation funds, and the money power behind the scenes didn't like it, and so the switch was turned on through the media to denigrate and pressure Jack Lang to such an extent where the governor, essentially acting on behalf of the media being the power arm of the money power, the governor removed Jack Lang's commission, the government, and caused New South Wales to go to an election, and the people decided, and they threw Jack Lang out. So interesting that it was a Labor in New South Wales, and it was a Labor federally that was thrown out. And here we are, we're looking at Victoria, a state where we have a Labor government, totalitarian, using this lockdown. Now, I'm going to, just before I do anything else, I'm going to cut across to something that I saw in the COVID-19, this is the New Zealand Act. The COVID-19 Public Health Response Act. I believe this is the act that Jacinta is working under, the Prime Minister of New Zealand. Point 7 of this act. The act binds the crown. This act binds the crown. What she's saying with this law is that the crown is bound. And I find that interesting, because the next part of this on Target, which will be posted up on Thursday, is from an article written by Augusto Zimmerman. Augusto Zimmerman, constitutional person from Western Australia, involved with universities, and that in the online journal Quadrant, he wrote that this is not so. that in actual fact what's going on is against the law of the land. And I find that it's time for us to actually revisit this whole question of reserve powers. Now, in Australia, we have state governors who are appointed as representatives of the Queen, and federally we have the Governor-General, who is also appointed as representative of the Queen. We live federally in a limited constitutional monarchy. The powers of the federal government are limited and are defined within the Constitution, of which Australian people, through public and community-based conventions, drew up the Constitution in the 1800s, late 1800s, and they voted on it. And in 1901, the Act had already gone through Parliament, and we were declaring ourselves as a sovereign nation, the Federation of Australian Commonwealth, and its independent states, its sovereign states, independent of Britain, independent of the British Parliament. But the Queen, we retain the Queen as the Queen of Australia, and she also is, by that, the Queen of Victoria, and she's the Queen of South Australia, Queen of New South Wales, because each one of those constitutions is still a limiting constitutional government. That's what it is, with a monarch as the governor, representative of the monarch. So it's still there. So what we're talking about today is the reserve powers. Now, I'd be interested to know what's going on in Canada and the effect that the governor or the lieutenant governor or the Governor-General in Canada has over everyday politics, and if this reserve power is something that's in the people's minds. Your thoughts, please, Robert Klinck.
Well, we do have a Governor-General. She's a woman. She's a former astronaut. She was appointed by Trudeau, I believe, Trudeau, who's a Liberal. And right now she's getting some very bad publicity because she's been apparently abusive to her staff. She would not be the first female Governor-General who has been accused of that. I remember when I was working in the House of Commons in the 1980s, there was one who was getting the same kind of criticism. Now, you wonder if an astronaut is well qualified to become a Governor-General, because the Governor-General's responsibilities, while normally not very serious, can become serious in times of political crisis or great conflict. So we've had such a strange selection of Governor-General. We had two women as well, and they were both graduates of the national broadcasting system, the CBC. And it just seemed that they were not people who were well prepared to be holding such a responsible position. So I have felt for a number of years now that they are appointing sort of lightweight people to that position. It's a very dangerous thing to do because there can be genuine crises that arise, and you have to have somebody who knows what their responsibilities are and is prepared to use judgment in order to resolve real log jams or something like that in national affairs. I don't know. We had such an attempt to undermine all our institutions with strange appointments. I just don't know how effective our institutions are anymore. You know, you have to have appropriate personnel. Now, I'm sure the Governor-General does get some excellent advice, because there are extremely intelligent people who are operating the bureaucracy. I just don't know that. Well, that too is a dangerous thing, because many of these bureaucrats are actually oriented toward centralization of power. You know, this is something that's been very common among the top bureaucrats in Canada. So I just don't know. One hopes that these people have a sense of responsibility that supersedes their apparent prejudices and tendencies, but it's kind of a scary situation. I don't have a lot of confidence in it. Now, we did have a crisis in Canada where the Governor General did dismiss a government. I think that's happened only once. I'm going by memory here. I haven't looked at this for a long time. I think it was in 1926, and I think it is known in history as the King Byng thing, because at that time, the leader of the opposition was William Lyon Mackenzie King. The Governor General was a fellow named Byng, B-Y-N-G, and thing is just the incident that occurred. The result of that was not necessarily a good thing. There was a prime minister, I'm quite sure his name was Arthur Meighen, and his government was dismissed and replaced by William Lyon Mackenzie King. But unfortunately, William Lyon Mackenzie King was a graduate of the Rockefeller Corporation, and he had a very senior position. He knew John F. Rockefeller personally. He was on good terms with him. So in effect, we had, as a result of this dismissal of Meighen's government, I'm not suggesting the Governor General was involved in a plot or anything. It's just the way things went with the electoral results and so on. But we did end up with a fellow who seemed to have a lot of allegiance to a foreign corporation. And I'm sure that played quite a part in his time as Prime Minister of Canada. I believe, too, that he was Prime Minister of Canada for more years than any other. So William Lyon Mackenzie King was there for a long time.
No worries. Thank you for that.
Anyway.
Thank you for that touch on history, Robert. To me, it's important. First of all, if King is there as a, if you like, as a Rockefeller appointment, he's selected rather than elected. I think that's very important to understand that. And that the constitutional situation that was actually occurring prior to that, which actually caused the Governor General to intercede and go back to the people. I think these things are important. Whether the end result was good or bad. I mean, in Australia we had Malcolm Fraser. He was a complete disaster. Malcolm Fraser, and his treasurer was John Howard. John Howard went on to be a very long-serving Prime Minister. But in my view, what a complete disaster both those people were. But that was what Australia chose, and in your instance, that's what Canada chose. Going back to the people, causing them to actually challenge what is going on with the government. And this reserve power of the Governor-General or the Governor in states, I think, is absolutely vital. I think it's very, very important to recognise that it is a power almost over and above the political hacks that go on in the parliaments. Your thoughts, please, Wally.
Well, I guess that's what it's meant to be, because there has been an attempt to try and institute measures which would minimize the political ideological influence on constitutional issues, in order to maintain a lack of a balance, or a lack of bias, to give stability to the government, essentially. William Mackenzie King, he was actually an employee, I think, of the Rockefellers prior to his becoming the Prime Minister. And he actually is the one who is supposed to have signed the passage of Leon Trotsky from New York with his band of revolutionaries at Halifax Harbor. He's supposed to have actually signed their passage. I think there was some kind of a delay at the time that held things up a little bit. I don't know more details about it, but
no worries. I'm just cutting across, Wally, to have a look. I'm just going to cut across. I've just found a Wikipedia article on the King Byng affair, and highlighted it was in 1926 when the Governor-General refused a request by his Prime Minister to dissolve Parliament and call a general election. Right, he refused to request. So that I'm going to leave that link on this broadcast so that people can actually look at it, because it's to me the idea of Whitlam and Fraser 1975 in Australia, and the King being affair 1926 in Canada, and also the Jack Lang affair in New South Wales. These to me are important events. When a government is out of hand, when it's actually not doing the right thing by the people, then you've still got the option of exercising the removal of the commission through the governor or the governor-general. There's still this option. People individually, the citizens of a community, can petition the Queen's representative. They can petition the Queen's representative to actually step in and place as a if you like, a power over and above government, as the umpire, can actually place a situation back to the people, can place it back to the people so they can decide for themselves. Australia's it is a constant. That's exactly right. Yeah. That's right. And in Australia, we're fortunate because the federal constitution is an agreement between the people. Whereas we the people, and then it names the states. And that's the preamble to our constitution. And I believe America is similar to that. Their introduction or preamble to their constitution is similar. It's an agreement between the people. America never had. It was actually an imposed constitution. They never had a referenda. They never had a vote on it to see if that's what they want. And of course, the amendments that went through, that's again another historical story in itself. But what we're talking about reserve powers. We're talking about, we've got a situation in Victoria where there is a lockdown. There's if you like, a phantom threat. COVID-19, the testing is not specific for COVID-19. It could be COVID-18 or 17, or you could be having a flu and your test could be positive based on that. It is not specific to COVID-19. The PCR test won't cut the mustard. And that to me is most profound, that morbidity, mortality, and the test is not even fit for purpose. Now we've got a lockdown, we're lunching our economies, we're actually shutting industry down. People can't process their ongoing cash flows. It really is in dire straits in Victoria. And the thing is that Victorians can actually start to do something. They can. They put their thinking caps on and they can start to write a letter, just a simple letter, appropriately addressed to the governor of their state, and start placing their thoughts there and saying, hang on, we need to actually pull this back. We need to come back to us to see what we're going to decide on this matter. This has gone well past the power of what government should have. And to me, this historical constitutional issues that have preceded the events of today demonstrate that it has to be the people that decide. They have to decide the end in a situation like this. Your thoughts, please, Robert Klinck.
Well, the Governor General and the Lieutenant Governors and in Canada, I think, are supposed to be representing the interests of the people and not to be controlled by the governments that are elected, which are temporary in nature. So it could be that a program of bringing the will of the people effectively to the governor could have an influence on the situation. It sounds like a somewhat promising course to follow. The Queen, when she was invested as the Queen or crowned as the Queen, took a very solemn oath. She was a young woman, and she seemed to be taking it very seriously. I don't know to what extent she remembers that oath, Some people have alleged that she has not entirely respected it, but it was a very, very serious ceremony. And I'm not sure if the members of the Commonwealth were mentioned in that. I remember I've looked at it sometime, but certainly she had made very serious promises to maintain the traditional laws, the common law, and all that of Britain, and also the position of the Church of England, which doesn't. It seems as if it's just fading out of sight. So I don't know, and I know that Prince Charles has said that he will be the defender of faith, not the defender of the faith. The faith, of course, is the Church of England. So I'm not sure how all this is heading, but certainly if the holders of these institutions could be reminded of their historical importance, they might be persuaded to intervene in some way if they perceive that the government is thwarting the will of the people, or in the case of this COVID thing, definitely abusing the people. There's no question that the most extraordinary abuse is going on. It's almost, well, it is beyond belief, the position that we've got into in the last half year. It's it's terrifying, in fact, because we keep getting warnings from the medical people who seem to have taken over the role of government, that these control measures are going to go on for years yet. So the political people have sort of surrendered their authority to these obscure bureaucrats in the medical field at an international level. It's really something. You know, we have a very few alleged medical authorities. They don't seem to be that authoritative if you look into their backgrounds, but they are making these determinations of how the entire world is going to respond to this alleged crisis. And no criticism seems to be allowed, much less considered. You know, everybody's just going along with the advice from these people. But there are many, many authorities of equal competence, if not superior competence, who have been severely critical of what's being done. So it's really, as I've said, it's a political coup and an economic coup, and it's really important that we should know who's behind it, identify them. It's obviously a small and very powerful and very well-financed group, but it's not acting in a way that is promoting science or protecting the rights of the population not to be abused by what purports to be their own governments.
Yeah, no, that's very important there, Robert, that the actual process of the imposition of the lockdown, I call it a lockdown, you might call it something else, but it is a lockdown. It's essentially home arrest, especially in the state of Victoria and New Zealand. And in this state, this lockdown, of course, people who are isolated, people who are so desperate for company, they're not receiving that support. They're not. They have to maintain isolation, and of course the morbidity of someone who may already have pre-existing conditions, and they just perish. They just lay down and die. This is so. I do not want any of this. My daughter can't see me. My son can't see me. My uncle, my whatever. And in the old folks' homes, where of course this is absolutely vital. And what are they doing? What are they doing? They're locking them in isolation. They're not offering bona fide support. They're not, no question of alternative therapy to actually manage an influenza, nothing like that. They want the numbers to go up. They are doing everything physically possible for the numbers to go up, because on the basis of the numbers, it's justification for mandatory vaccines for all. And think of all those filthy lucre rolling in, those filthy lucre, these experts who just happen to be tied back to organisations and companies where all this filthy lucre is going to come in. They have vested interests. They are not impartial. And it's to the point where we're seeing criminal behaviour by our governments, by these experts, because they are compromised. They are not independent, and the science is not justified for their behaviour. It is, to me, it's unconstitutional, and that's why we've got to look at, as you said, Robert, how can we actually get to the point where the will of the people becomes apparent to the Governor of Victoria, and the Governor of Victoria can then in confidence exercise those reserve powers and place it back to the people. Your thoughts, please, Wallace.
Well, it's a key and central part of the British tradition that we should have limited government, limited government, not governments that run rampant and out of control. So this is the key aspect of policy, actually, that we're facing. And, this woman who I have a lot of respect for, this amazing Polly, she does an amazing job of dealing with these questions that you just brought up concerning, bias and interest, because there is actually appears to be enormous amounts of money involved in the measures that are being taken to allegedly combat this virus. And the virus seems to be rather ephemeral. You've got so many conflicting reports. Some people are saying they're not even confident that they have properly identified the virus. And it's just, but the contracts and so on that have been made, and some of these, it appears that some of these people who are key to the whole thing had actually been making arrangements prior to its emergence on the scene. So it would seem to me that there is no question that there is policy concerning this, and policy that goes back beyond the actual alleged threat. So, I mean, and you can't, and where's the balance? I mean, for what other things would you shut a whole country down, or a series of countries? What other illnesses would you do that? It would seem more to deal with a specific case, to isolate someone who has the affliction, but not to shut down whole nations, because as has been pointed out, the damage that has been done far exceeds the actual damage that the virus is even alleged to have caused. And there are many, many suggestions, and some of them seem to be well demonstrated, that the reporting of the of the seriousness of the virus and of the deaths has in some cases at least been exaggerated, and in some cases exaggerated by a considerable amount. So it just seems to me that it's part of a general action amongst certain powerful people in the world, people who have big economic interests and who seek further profit from those interests, and also seek to have an influence over elected representatives that is far beyond what they should have. And it seems to me that a lot of the politicians are just going along with it. It's easier for them to go along with it than to examine it and to perhaps counter it. So I don't know. It's really, it seems as though there are a number of very powerful people who are involved, and not only involved, but some of these people seem to have had connections, and very close connections, sometimes for a long time. So it seems like a sort of an elite world club that wants to exert its completely undue influence and control over world affairs.
Thank you for that, Wally. That's a very, very telling summary. Exerting their influence over world affairs. Now, the opportunity is there, if you consider it, the opportunity is there for the Victorian people to actually exercise their influence over it and throw off this straitjacket. And they can do it. They've actually got they've got the governor that they can petition to. They've also got, as you mentioned, Robert, the politicians are ducking for cover. It would be easier if they did nothing. But the fact is that the politician is paid there to represent the will of the people. And if a sufficient number of people are contacting their politician and sternly rebuking them for not insisting that Parliament is sitting and not insisting that this whole thing is questioned right to the bone, they are debaters. They are combative by nature. They are combative. That's why they're politicians. And if they can't go into bat for the well-being of their communities, then what purpose is it? What point is having them as your representative? You've seriously got to look at it. And so they've got to come to grips with this this whole thing of representation. What is it about? It is about exerting the will of the people. That's what it's about. The vote is a small amount of power that, if you like, the word is not delegate. The word is actually allowed for the politician to steward. That power is there for the politician to steward, whereas most politicians, if you like, insist that they have that power and it has been delegated to them. But it's up to the individuals in community to remind them it's not a carte blanche. They can't just go hammer and tong over this and do nothing. They're answerable every single day, just not once every 4 years. And I might note that the Victorian local government elections are due in less than 2 months, just a bit under 8 weeks. And there is opportunity for a creative people to exert some influence and certainly influence the governor in regard to what's going on, of whether they accept the situation or they don't, and whether it should continue or whether this government should be pulled to order and the people allowed to decide. Your thoughts, please, and closing comments, Robert.
Yeah, well, looking at the politicians, you would swear sometimes, some of them are very smooth, but there are a number of them. The Premier of Ontario is one, and Boris Johnson in the UK is one, who, in dealing with this COVID business and the measures that they're insisting should be taken, have looked very uncomfortable. In fact, sometimes you had the impression that somebody was standing behind them with a gun in their back. They looked so uncomfortable about the thing. So, you know, we've seen this business in the United States of how business executives, big entertainers, and politicians, many politicians, primarily politicians, have been subjected to blackmail by this Jeffrey Epstein fellow. And he's not the first one. There was another instance of this in Britain, a fellow named Sir, what's his name, Savile, Sir. Anyway, he was doing the same thing. So what happens, it seems, is that certain people are selected. Temptation is put in their way, and if they yield to it, then they are promoted up the ladder, and they get into positions of power. It's sad to contemplate this. You know, you think they're just people like us, but it really is looking as if the ones who are dictating policy, the ones who get to the top are people who are not free, who are not responding to the population because they're responding to controls from some hidden source, and they're being dictated to. So it's a sad situation, but I think in light of the revelations that have come forth in recent times, it's pretty hard to avoid the conclusion that this is actually a system that has been imposed, and actually has probably been imposed for a long time. There's I don't know, it's a sad state of affairs if it's the case, but it certainly seems as if we should be wary of anybody who has attained a position of alleged high power. I mean, we know that the politicians are not the ultimate authority. The politicians are all, in the end, controlled by those who control money, because politicians require money in order to get elected. So, and we know that operates that way. But in effect, what has been done to the people of all these countries, as you mentioned, Arnie, it is absolutely brutal. In particular, what's been going on in the care homes. It's uncivilized, it's savage. And you have to say that the people who are imposing that regime on those defenseless, people, I go to a care home. I know those people. There's so many people in there who are so kind and inoffensive, and all the pleasure has been stripped out of their lives because they've been put into this isolation. Well, I think that is an indication that the people who are controlling policy are definitely psychopaths. You couldn't do this to these defenseless people if you were not a psychopath. So it's a very troubling situation. We have to be very wary of any politician because we don't know the extent to which they actually are free or whether they are under some kind of occult control. Yeah. And you just have to admit that this is, well, we know it's the truth because we've had all these recent revelations of what's been going on in the UK and in Belgium and in the United States. Are just scandalous subversion of the freedom of politicians to represent the population. So we got to reckon with this. It's not just theoretical. It's obviously something that comes into play that has some effect, and we should be very circumspect about trusting politicians in these circumstances. We have to start to exert popular pressure on these people. I think that if we do that, then something will give because they're under pressure from other sources that will it will lead to an explosion of some kind, I'm sure. Anyway, that's the situation as I see it. And we have to realize that we are dealing with people who have psychopathic tendencies as far as the formulation of the underlying policy that's going on is concerned. They can see millions of people ruined across the world. It doesn't seem to faze them at all. So that's what we're dealing with.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thank you for that, Robert. Before I cut across to you, Wally, I just want to go back to the front page of the Australian, because it's interesting you point out the level of inordinate influence over our politicians. And here we have the, if you like, the branch stacking within a political party is mentioned here, branch stacking. And we also earlier on we talked about the Chinese and the scientists having getting Australian scientists essentially onto their payroll. I think these are very, very important points to consider that we actually are not dealing with free politicians. We're not actually dealing with politicians who belong to us at all. They're actually part of, if you like, other powers. They are subject to other influences, and they are doing the work of those other influences instead of doing what's best. The people in care homes are probably the most vulnerable people of all. The most placid, the most vulnerable, almost as vulnerable as a newborn. And there they are, and they are being brutalised by this policy. So is it good? If they were a health official, is this good? I don't think so. I take it that you're right on the money with what you're saying there, Robert. Your thoughts and closing comments, please, Wally.
Well, I have to agree with all of that. I think what we have to really zero in on is the concept of integrity. If you don't have integrity, you're untrustworthy and unreliable, and things just don't work, except for those who have most guile and who are able to manipulate things to their own advantage. So I think we have to look at the cause of this lack of integrity. I think that I have, on rare occasions, noticed that certain officials look rather uncomfortable. You'd almost get the impression that they wished they weren't there, at least for the moment, because it seemed like they were under some kind of spell, compulsion, power, or something. Something was dictating their compliance, at least, and something that made them uncomfortable. Maybe they have a spark of conscience. But, you know, it's difficult for us to really imagine the pressures that some people might come under when they get in a powerful governmental position where they can influence the fortunes of other people. So it may be that some of them go through stresses and threats and so on that we can't see and perhaps can't easily imagine. And I must say I have to reiterate, the love of money is the root of all evil. And I don't think that that is an extravagant statement, because money is the means of survival. It is the means of life, the good life, and prestige, and all of those things that enter into human association. So if money is made, if there's a threat made to your access to money, most people are under great pressure and duress, and I hate to say it, but I think many people cave in to the people who are applying that pressure and comply with their the pressure that's put upon them. So this is, and again, it gets back to this business. If somebody can threaten your security, most people are, as I say, in tremendous pressure to comply with pressure. But if you are independent, you can quite easily, in many instances at least, simply thumb your nose at people who try to bring undue and improper pressure upon you. But what are you going to do when you have a family to feed, when you have to feed yourself? I mean, it's, what I'm saying is I think it's an enormous factor contributing to corruption in public life and in personal affairs. And that applies not only to the higher levels of society who have something to lose, but it applies to the financial world, it applies to the corporate world. So that things, because of insecurity, are not conducted in with integrity in an honorable fashion. In other words, how are things expected to work under those conditions? I don't think it's possible. And I think that I don't know why that we were given that popular statement about the love of money, but I don't think anything could be more appropriate.
Thank you, Wally. I'm going to cut across to the front page of the Australian before I close today. In the middle of it, there it is. Victoria seeks to enforce the virus rules well into 2021. Here we are, August, and they're saying that we're going to go at least another 6 months. And of course, the compromise of the Victorian government is that China's great secretive science swindle. There it is. There, it's they are actually got thousands of scientists and students, PhDs, doing the work, doing their bidding in their own military. And these are Australian people who are trying to pay their bills, are trying to make a crust. It's just, yes, the inordinate power that finance has over all of us. And here it is here, that China is such inordinate influence over the Victorian government openly Bolshevik, and of course doing the will of the totalitarian masters. It's quite sad that it's what it's come to. So what we've got to do is look at it as communities of free people. We are still free. They may be locking us down, but we're still free. We still have the tools of freedom there. And the first is to let your governor or governor-general know that you're not happy with this lockdown, and for them to call that government to order and send it back to the people for the people to decide. That's the first thing of the Victorian governor, is to let the people decide. And you've got to consider that writing to your politician, absolutely. Writing to the governor or the governor-general, absolutely. You've got to do it. You can't sit on your hands on this. There are many options. And then, of course, you consider as well the Victorian Council elections. The local government elections are coming up in 8 weeks. What are you doing about your candidate? And is your candidate the right person that's actually going to be as brave as to dare say or dare do that they have no confidence in the Victorian government, and to actually hold a vote in their council chambers of a vote of no confidence and pass that resolution? I mean, these are the sorts of things that you can do in order to influence the situation. You can do something. You've got to choose to do something. Freedom is at stake here. It's not just you and now. This goes back that we inherited this limited constitutional monarchy. It is the work of many, many generations. It is essentially the evolution of more than 1,000 years of constitutional government, more than 1,000 years in the sense of King Alfred the Great bringing Britain together as one nation, and then finding it in the year 1100, our ancient freedoms. It was called the, what was it called? The Great Charter. I can't remember it. Yeah, but it was before the Magna Carta was 1215, but Coronation Charter, 1100, and already it was set in stone at 1100. We've got to consider that this idea of limiting government is 1,000 years or more old. And here we are. Is this what we're going to hand over to our children and our grandchildren? Are we really going to capitulate that easily? I think not. I think we've just got to be creative now and start placing our effort for this generation, for this, if you like, this pursuit of freedom and opposition to tyranny. Opposition to tyranny. The Administrative Era, Series 3. Thank you so much, Wally and Robert, for today.
Thank you, Arnie.
No worries. Cheers then. Thanks, ladies and gentlemen.